I am worried. I can't say that I really felt confident beforehand, again, for all the reasons that I've given. Trump is Trump and he's up against a lot. Um, it, would- it is disturbing because you could say the one major improvement, in the situation, was the reimposition of restrictions on those ATACMS missiles. And if that's gone, then we really are back to where we are. Because the weapons have continued to flow. There was a hiatus of something like 3 days a couple of months ago, but that's it. It made no real difference. Yeah, there's all those weapons. They're still flowing through the pipeline. The intelligence support is there. Nothing has really changed. The only thing that had changed, of course, was that policy on the ATACMS missiles. And if that reverts to the Biden policy, then we're exactly where we were. And I have to say, that's disheartening.
Well, we're probably not just back where we were. We're probably worse than where we were. I mean, the reason that we saw so much restraint from Russia on these attackums is because there was this knowledge that Trump was coming into
Right.
office and he's expressing that this is going to end right away. If Trump comes in and he lifts these restrictions and we start firing attackums and storm shadows back into Russia, then the Russians are like, well, okay, then we did what we could, we tried, we waited and we didn't retaliate. So let's just play this out. If this is lifted, because it seems like that's where we're heading, is where long range strikes might get approval again, and the West begins firing missiles into Russia. How would Russia respond? How would you respond? How would you recommend Putin respond to something like this?
Yeah. Well, I'd probably respond emotionally, and that wouldn't be the right thing to
You're
do.
not you're
But I'm,
not that emotional. I would respond emotionally. You wouldn't. I
well, I would think about it. But yeah, it's a really tough one. Again, we've talked about this. It's sort of damned if you do, damned if you don't. If Putin responds in kind and by striking NATO territory, and again, he would be justified in doing this. But you can imagine that's I think what Zelensky and his people are hoping for, because they think that that could really bring in direct NATO involvement, much more so than just these ATACMS missiles, and and Russia doesn't want that to happen, right? Now, on the other hand, if Russia doesn't respond, then then they will be encouraging the West, NATO in particular, to continue to escalate. And you already get that kind of talk. It's like, oh, the Russians, they say these things, they don't do anything. What's this talk? Um, we just don't need to worry, right? This is just a Russian talking point, and we have to do what we have to do. Um, and that takes you farther up the escalation ladder. So, and then eventually the Russians really will have to respond when the situation becomes rather dire, and the response could be, all the more significant and all the more likely to maybe bring in NATO. It's a hard one. I'm glad that I'm not in Putin's position. I just don't. Again, it's just like his restraint is often interpreted as weakness. And then, but then when he does respond firmly, you get hysteria on the other side. And so what do you do? When you're dealing with an opponent like this, I really don't know. I
yeah,
think like
well,
the Oreshnik was a good sort of threading of the needle, and we saw again the Iranians do something similar, and in response to Israeli provocations. But you can only do that so much. At some point, that those demonstrative uh, responses cease to have any meaning, and you have to do something substantive if the other side just ignores them.
yeah, well, I don't know if Russia's done very many demonstrative attacks. There was just that one Oreshnik.
Yeah,
That was it. And I think there maybe needs to be a reminder to the West. Just get it through their thick skulls, what they're playing with. Have a real display of power. Because this narrative that Russia is cannibalizing their washing machines and fighting the Ukrainians with shovels and they've lost over 1.2 million men. I mean, this is what Kellogg is saying, is that they've lost
yeah,
1 million men. So if you hear that, you're just like, oh man, Russia's really weak. It's World War II casualties all over again, and it's just starting. So I think they just need to get it through their skulls. If it was me, I would say like you have to use an Russian. Okay, it depends on if the Taurus does like if they use the Taurus and does some real damage in Moscow, kills civilians or whatever. The pressure is going to be so big on Putin. I mean, and I feel like I feel like he might cave into that pressure, and it might be the right sense. I mean, even me, I'm at the point where if this happens, I'm just like, this is how I would do it. I would say I would tell all the West publicly, state, okay, this is what you guys did. You guys fired a missile into Russia. You killed this many people, did whatever. We are telling you that, that this is a huge red line you cross. We don't want to kill people in Germany or in France or wherever, but we're going to strike this headquarters that we know where you guys are operating out of. We're going to strike it at this date, this time, prepare all of your air defenses, do whatever, evacuate it so we don't kill anybody, and then boom, everybody sits and everybody's waiting for the strike. And then, it's like what Iran did with Israel. They telegraphed it in advance. But I would, if I was Russia, I would give them a week advance, be like, hey, this is it, just to show that you couldn't do anything to stop this. Don't mess around. We can, if you really want to go to war, you guys are going to be in big trouble. Russia doesn't engage in decapitation strikes. It hasn't been going off after these command structures. It hasn't been going after Zelensky. They've been treating, unfortunately, the people of Ukraine and the munitions of the West. But it has the ability to go for the jugular if it wants to. So demonstrate that.
Yeah, well, they may have to do that at some point. One thing I would say in the meantime, like starting right now, is they should go back. I remember Putin and others doing this, last fall when Biden lifted those restrictions on the ATACMS. They explained why this was unacceptable. They explained the direct NATO participation in the operation of these missiles. And, of course, it was largely, almost entirely ignored in the West. But at least, you hope that some of that can get through, at least to the leadership. I think he has to go out and say it again. You would think that saying it once or twice, like I heard it, I understood it, but it seems like these people, they just inhabit a different reality. And at least at this point, it might not do any good. It probably won't do any good, but just go out and say that forcefully. Hey, you understand what's going on if you do this again. And, we went easy on you again, because we were led to believe that by the Trump administration, there were rumors to this effect, that the Trump administration had notified the Russian government that they were not going to continue these strikes. So, so we went easy on you this time. But if these resume, we're going to have to respond in kind. I think they need to state it forcefully, clearly now.
Okay, well, I guess we'll see. I mean, no statements come out. Yet. It hasn't happened yet. So maybe, it'll turn around, but it just feels like the pendulum just swifted the other way. And if it does happen, then I think we're going to be at the most dangerous part of this conflict ever. This is going to be more dangerous than when Biden was in charge doing this, because, like I said, Trump's back. The reason that Russia was kind of holding off towards the end when those restrictions were lifted is because they were aware that Trump had this stance that this was not an okay policy. Trump puts this policy back in, we could be looking at more rapid escalation, and, Biden was awful, but Trump, it could be more emotional, and I could see it going. The one thing about Trump is that he goes fast with things, and you don't want to go fast when you're looking at an escalation ladder war going here,
Right. He's impulsive, right?